All right, good morning again, everybody. First of all, before we get started with the sermon, if you are on the middle of the row here, and you're near the attendance pads, if you'd sign in this morning and start sending that down the road, that would be great. We'd love everybody to sign in. And if you are visiting today, we especially would love to hear from you. And if you have a point of contact, an email address, a street address, something where we could reach out and welcome you in the coming days, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you again, and welcome, everybody. So if this is your first time here ever, or maybe in the first time in this sermon series, we are doing a series on Paul's second and part of his third missionary journey. So in the early church in the first century, you may remember the story of Jesus' ascension, and then we have the day of Pentecost, and then basically those who would be responsible for getting the word out and sharing the message of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ began to carry this message nearby and far away into the ends of the world as they understood it or could imagine it in their time, which was largely within the confines of the Roman Empire. And so that's where Paul's journeys take place. And we talked about his first trip around some small cities in Asia Minor. Then he came back to Jerusalem. There was an early church council or a meeting where they decided that the Gentiles, aka the non-Jewish people, would be welcomed to be a part of this new movement that they were calling the Way. And then Paul went out a little bit further, and that's where we've picked up with this sermon series. And so we're going to retrace our steps here on the map just for a moment. So here is most of, or a large part of the Roman Empire, certainly the part that Paul was most familiar with. He was from down here in the city called Tarsus, and for a reference point, here is Jerusalem down here. So we began telling the story of this missionary journey in the city of Troas, which wasn't a gigantic city in Paul's time, but it was a fairly well-utilized seaport. And so it's in Paul's experience in Troas where he really becomes obedient to where he feels God is leading him next. And he has this vision of a dream where a man from Macedonia says, "Come and to help us." And so Macedonia is this region over here, famous for being the home base of Alexander the Great and his father Philip II. And so Paul and his traveling companions, they make their way by sea over here to Philippi. And it's in Philippi that they learn that the cost of their discipleship may have a price. It is not going to be effortless. Not everybody's going to be receptive, but the church begins to grow here, and it grows beyond outside the bounds of just sort of the early people that we would now call Jewish Christians who were receptive to this message that Paul had to share. Now the Gentiles are starting to be interested in this message, and now the church has already, or the way has already migrated into Europe. Paul then travels by land to this city of Thessalonica, and then he goes to Berea, and then he makes his way down here to Athens. And Athens is where we talked about Paul really understanding that if this message is going to land, he needs to meet the people where they are. He needs to meet them on their terms and speak to them in a way that they're familiar with. And so he converses with some of the wise minds of Athens, the Epicureans and the Stoics and the philosophers, and he's exchanging ideas, and he's learning and they are learning. But there are people who cling on to this message, and they are excited about it, so they want to hear more from him. Then Paul makes his way down to Corinth, which we talked about last week and which you saw some on the video. And this is where the second missionary journey is starting to wrap up. So Paul, at that point, goes down here to Tenchria, which is the seaport of Corinth, at least on the Aegean side, and he sails over to Ephesus, where he's only for a very short period of time before he goes back to Jerusalem and then travels by land back to Ephesus on the third missionary journey. All right, so he's made this loop now, and he's covered a lot of turf, and he is now in Ephesus, and that's where we pick up our story today. The part of the story of Ephesus is one of the more extensive chapters in the book of Acts because there's a lot that happens here. He's there for about 2.5 years, and he makes home base there. First, when he arrives, as Stephen shared with us, he encounters some people who are a little bit confused about baptism, and so he sort of sets the record straight with them. And there are 12 people who are baptized, and number 12, of course, isn't by accident. And now there's 12 people who are beginning to live and understand and share the word around Ephesus. And Paul is spending more time writing back to some of the communities that he's been in touch with. He writes back possibly during this time to the people in Corinth, and he writes the letters of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And so Paul really sets up shop in a way that is more semi-permanent than the other places he has been on this journey. But as I said, it is not a simple mission that he is on. And he is meeting people with mixed receptivity. Now, if it wasn't for evidence of the Holy Spirit helping his ministry to bear fruit, I don't know that Paul would have been able to stick with it as long as he did. But he's deeply convicted about what he believes. He's excited about what's happening, and he's also troubled by what he's witnessing. And he knows that already the church that he has helped establish in these house churches and these fledgling communities that are getting started are already starting to struggle. They're grappling with a lot of difficult things. They're challenged by the world around them and how to make their faith intersect with that. It's an ongoing challenge that they face, and it is no different here in the city of Ephesus. So, if I were to sum it up, I'd say it this way. Paul is that dinner guest who hits the trifecta of taboos when he is coming to dinner. And you can name the trifecta of taboos. What are they? What are you not supposed to talk about? Politics, religion, and I heard sex, yes. That's 4. Money, right? So we'll say 3.5, okay? Sex gets a half a point. All right, so Paul hits the trifecta about talking about religion and about politics and about money. Because he knows that he needs to share about these things if people are going to have their lives fully transformed. And so he begins by going after religion. And he doesn't even really go after religion. It just sort of happens that way. So let's talk about what's going on in this part of the world at this time with regard to religion. As you probably remember, Jews within the Roman Empire have a very delicate kind of relationship with their ability to practice their faith and to not be persecuted by the Roman government. Okay? They've struck this understanding, which is basically, hey, as long as your people pay taxes, as long as you follow the laws, we will let you do your own thing. You can worship how you want to. You can worship the God that you want to. You can do all of the unique things that you do with your diets. But that is your business so long as you stay in your lane. Okay? Now, the challenge here is that any time that there is a disruption or any kind of upheaval within the Jewish community, the rest of the Jews, the larger population, get real nervous about that, right? For example, in the year 49, we talked about how Priscilla and Aquila, who Paul met in Corinth, they were part of a group of people in exile because they had been expelled from Rome because there was some movement or conversation and some disagreement and some infighting within the Jewish community on account of, we know, Christus. Now, many have speculated that they're talking about this message of Christ or this message of Jesus that is getting around in Rome, and there's some infighting and some arguments around that, and it apparently has caused enough of a disturbance that Claudius, the empire, says, out, all of you, get out. You are no longer welcome in the city of Rome, and so it sent a bunch of people running. We also know that in the time of Jesus, that one of the things that happens in Holy Week is the people are very excited about Jesus of Nazareth coming to their town, and there's the Palm Sunday procession. But as Jesus is flipping over tables and as he's challenging some of the authorities, and people are having a lot of hard conversations, but also probably some angry one, and there's some hostility, and it's during the Passover celebration, and tension is at a boiling point, and a lot of the Jewish authorities are like, keep a lid on this Jesus guy, he's going to mess this up for us. because at any moment, Rome may say, enough, you're done. You're not allowed to practice your faith freely. You're not welcome in the empire, or they get killed. So they are tiptoeing on eggshells in the way that they practice their faith. As Paul goes from Troas to Philippi, to Thessalonica, to Berea, to Athens, to Corinth, to Ephesus, every one of those stops, what he's doing is he's going into the synagogues, he is teaching and preaching and sharing about Jesus as the fulfillment of this faith that they have practiced in common. And some are very open to the message. They're excited about it. They say, we want to be a part of this. But other people are very resistant and said, this is not what we were taught. This is not our faith tradition. You are blasphemous. You are going against this. And so there's clashes. And as the clashes become more vocal, and if they become physical at all, then the Jewish population says, hey, tamp this down so that we don't wreck this for all of us. So you understand sort of what's going on here. There is this thing going on within the religion that makes this complicated. The other religious piece that Paul is challenging is that when he goes to places within the Roman Empire, that there are places that, like Ephesus, that are called imperial cult centers, which means that this is one of the places, probably the largest cities in most cases. These are the places where there are statues to the emperor. Remember, the Roman emperor is deemed to be the Son of God. Each Roman emperor in succession was a divine human being, a God-man, right? Who was worthy of and expected to be worshipped. It wasn't just that you pay your taxes, it's also that you worship our Caesar, or you worship our emperor. Okay? So any challenge to that way of thinking is now moving from the religious piece into the political piece. What do you mean you don't worship the emperor? What do you mean you don't pay tribute to Apollo? What do you mean that you don't worship Artemis in the case of Ephesus? When people are being pulled away from that kind of way of worshiping, it's not just a religious issue. Now it's very much a deeply ingrained political issue. And to hit the third on the taboo trifecta, the money part. So the part that we didn't get to in the story is if we continue in reading through this chapter in Acts, what eventually happens is that Paul has been now in the city of Ephesus for over 2 years. He is lecturing daily in this lecture hall. People are receptive to his message. The movement is growing and growing more and more still. And as people are starting to question whether or not the Roman deities and the Greek deities that they have been worshiping now for generations are actually the things that they should be worshiping, it has a financial impact for 2 reasons. First of all, Ephesus is known in the ancient Near East as being the capital city for the worship of the goddess Artemis. Her Greek equivalent is Diana, or excuse me, Artemis is the Greek name. Diana is the Roman counterpart name. But she is the goddess of childbirth. She is the goddess of the moon. She is the goddess of the hunt. And so she is an important goddess and an important figure in this mythological world. And so when people were worshipers of Artemis, they would come from far and wide and make pilgrimages to worship in the temple of Artemis, which was a massive structure and one of the ancient wonders of the world in its time. So people were traveling far and wide, and if that tourism suffers in any way, it's going to take a big hit on the economy. And things really came to a tipping point, which we find out in the story, when this man named Demetrius, who was a silversmith, Demetrius and his fellow artisans created figurines of Artemis that they sold to the pilgrims to take back home with them. He was literally an idol creator, And that's how he made his living. In the video, in one of the gift shops today, they still sell little figurines of Artemis. Now, I don't think it's because anybody's going to Ephesus to see the ruins and to worship the goddess, although you never know. But I think that those statues are there. I just put that in the video so that you could see a little depiction of what a statue, a little figurine of Artemis would have looked like. And so Demetrius' complaint was, this guy Paul and the people that are beginning to follow his message and get on board with what he is saying are taking away from our business. They've stopped buying the idols. People are burning their sorcery books. Our economy is starting to suffer for this. And he says, you know how I'm going to rile everybody up? It may not be necessarily their pocketbooks that are suffering, but I'm going to point out that Paul is bad-mouthing Artemis. And so he whips people up, and the crowds begin to gather, and all of a sudden, this massive theater, which you saw in there, fills up with people. The estimates are somewhere between 25 and 50,000 people could have gathered in that theater. So imagine an entire arena full of people gathered to protest what Paul is doing. Paul now has a bounty on his head. If it's just been challenging and he didn't enjoy the pushback and there's been friction and he's been put in jail a few times, beaten previously, it's just gotten real, like really real. And the intensity is wrapped up. And there's an entire theater now of 25,000 or more people saying, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." And we're told by Luke that they chanted this for 2 hours straight in the theater. Paul, being who Paul is, wanted to go to the theater, stand on the stage, and address the people in a civilized manner. But his fellow followers knew better, and they probably pinned him down, but he wanted to go, and they kept him in a house because they said, "You will be a dead man if you go into that theater." And so they're able to keep him from going in there, and then they get him out of there, they smuggle him out after a time, and he is able to escape and leave town. But it was a close call. So I share this backstory with you because I think that it's really important to understand what's going on and how high the stakes are. We can look at pictures of ruins, we can read through the 18th, 19th chapter of Acts, but it's hard to get a full feel for what's going on and to see what Paul is doing here and the challenge of what he faces without knowing a more comprehensive view of the backstory of this. Paul's seeking to do something that is really incredibly difficult. He's trying to hold unity and build community in a place that is so diverse that there is all kinds of ideas about what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is virtuous. How do we use our money? Who do we worship? How do we engage in political endeavors? And he knows that if this is going to work, those things have to be secondary to the much more significant and foundational part of it, which is if we have Christ as our foundation, then the rest of these things are possible. It's easier to be the community if we focus on Christ as our foundation. I was in a meeting with our bishop this week. Our bishop, Jonathan Holston, is new to our conference. He started out back in September here in North Alabama, and he serves both our conference and the Alabama West Florida Conference to the south of us. And he shared something in this meeting that I was in that I didn't know. I mean, I don't know most things about him, but he said that his brother is a mortician. And I don't know how many of you have been to a graveside burial or an interment in recent years. But basically, most of the time, the way that this works, at least in the South, is that you'll get out of your car and you will walk over to the place where the grave has been dug, and there is a casket, and then there's a tent, like a tent for shade, for comfort, and then there's folding chairs under it, and usually the immediate family sits on the folding chairs under the tent. And the bishop's brother, the mortician's comment to him was, you know, what I know from being a mortician is the bigger the tent, the deeper we need to sink the stakes. The bigger the tent, the deeper the stakes. And I got to thinking that continues to be one of the great blessings and the challenges of the church in our day as it was in Paul's time. We use this idea of being a big tent church. We talk about the United Methodist denomination in that way. This idea, this metaphor that we can all fit under the same roof together, even though we may be different in many ways. As Wesley said, we need not think alike to love alike. It's this idea of unifying a different group, a diverse group, maybe even a disparate group of people. And that is what Paul was doing each step of the way. He's saying, look, the people in Athens are going to be very different than the people in Ephesus, but we have a common message. And if we sink the stakes deep enough and anchor them in the foundation of Jesus Christ, then the rest of the stuff seems to fall into place. And so here's the message, I think, from Acts 19 for all of us. Not a one of us in this room, I am confident in saying, is tempted to follow and worship Artemis. That I say with confidence. And yet, if what was at the core of the worship of Artemis was the things that were highly charged with institutions of religion, politics, and money, then man, oh man, things haven't changed much. Those are the things that keep trying to pull us away. Those are the things that sow seeds of difference and division and the wedges that come between us. And I'm not saying that those don't matter, because they do then and they do now. But the bigger the tent, the deeper the stakes. And if the stakes hit the shallow ground of political divisiveness, of economic divisiveness, of institutional divisiveness, then the roof's going to blow off every single time. What we need to do now in these deeply divided times, as they have been now for years, and are likely to continue to be in the future, is that if we as Grace, if we as the United Methodist Church, if we as the Church Universal are going to be able to fit under this same canopy together, then my goodness, our stakes have got to be anchored in the foundation of Jesus Christ and His grace. And the sibling relationship that we have with each other is what is going to help us not only pull through, but it is the witness that we provide to the world around us. And I thank God as we move through this sermon series that Christ called a tent maker to show us how we need to anchor those stakes deeper and deeper into the foundation of Jesus Christ. It's our challenge, it's our hope, and let it be our prayer.